Okay, welcome to TLC The Light Conversations, a podcast chat show where I interview experts on well-being and creativity. This is Series 3, Gems and Keys. The gems being our guests and the keys being the nuggets of wisdom shared here. Today's guest is esteemed filmmaker Nick Broomfield. Nick studied law in Cardiff and went on to study film at the National Film and Television School under Professor Colin Young. Nick's first film, Who Cares?, about slum clearance in Liverpool whilst at university, was made borrowing a wind-up Bolex camera and shooting it on short ends. Uh, Nick met Joan Churchill at film school, and together they made several films: Juvenile Liaison, Tattooed Tears, Soldier Girls, Lily Tomlin, and more recently, Eileen, Life and Death of a Serial Killer. Um, Nick was originally influenced by the observational style of filmmaking before moving largely by accident into the more idiosyncratic style for which he is better known. Um, while making Driving Me Crazy, a film that became hopelessly out of control, Nick decided to place himself into the film and created a new way of documentary filmmaking that inspired many after him. So Nick is really inspiring filmmaker for me, and also the recipient of many awards, including the Sundance First Prize, BAFTA, Prix Italia, DuPont Peabody Award, Grierson Award, Amnesty International Zone Award, and many more amazing awards, and the maker of over 20 films, which I'd say even more.
Over 30, probably.
Over 30 films. So we first met a long time ago, and I had to then go and look, Google. I think this was probably pre-Google, but I looked into your films, and the first film that came to me was your film Fetishes,
Oh, right.
which
Okay.
I really hope we're going to talk a bit about today.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting that that's the first film of yours I saw, because it's probably the darkest. Actually, it's not the darkest.
No.
It's not the darkest at
No.
all. But it's a surprising mix of dark and funny, and it actually, I think that's the first card. Yeah, it is the first card that I was gonna
Oh,
pull for you.
right.
So, um, yeah, can you tell me a bit about how that came about, the
Yeah.
film Fetishes?
It's actually one of the few films I didn't originate the idea of. HBO came to me and said that they were doing a series of films sort of that were to do with sort of sexual content, and that, these were the films that were uh, driving the numbers up on HBO. And in a way, they were financing all the other documentaries that were getting much lower ratings. But so uh, I was, at first, they wanted to do a kind of mix and match. They wanted to do a House of Domination in San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, and also Japan. I'm not quite sure why Japan. So that's kind of how we started, and we did quite a lot of research. And I guess I found this place. It's called Pandora's Box in New York. And it was kind of a community of, uh, I guess, dominatrixes in a very sort of beautiful building, which was beautifully kind of choreographed. There was a Versailles room, which was sumptuous, uh, a kind of medical room with various instruments of torture, a kind of, dog's kennel, a dungeon. But they were all very beautifully made. And the mistresses wore, incredibly beautiful outfits. And it was, I really felt, one could make an interesting film there because there were a great bunch of people that were very into the world of domination. Um, and I actually knew relatively nothing about it. So it sort of piqued my interest. So I went back to HBO and I said, I think we should just concentrate in this place because I think it's really interesting. I think it will make a really interesting film, and they're very interesting characters. Let's forget going to Japan and the other places. So that's what we did.
Yeah, and what ended up, you're right, the sets, I mean, the production value of everything, it looks like sort of elaborate set designs,
Yeah,
and you would
yeah,
actually cost a lot if you were
yeah,
creating
and it was
fiction.
a kind of, it was extreme in some ways, but it was also quite humorful there. It was quite a joyous place. Some of the other places I visited when I was doing the research were kind of pretty depressing.
Yeah.
So, I was just thinking, well, if I do it, I was in two minds really whether I was going to do the film or not. So, it was only really when I found Pandora's Box that I thought, oh, this could make a great film. And
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
I liked some of the mistresses. I thought they were funny and interesting, and they sort of yeah. As a filmmaker, you have to be personally interested, and feel that there's a story there that you want to tell.
Yeah, and I'm interested to know a little more about your research process. Like,
Hmm.
how much time do you put into the research before actually making a film?
Well,
Specifically this one, Fetishes,
yeah, this one.
generally.
Well, we went obviously to San Francisco, went around three or four places there, and then same thing in Los Angeles, and I think probably at that point in time, I was thinking I wasn't gonna do the film because I just didn't really find anything that really I thought was wonderful. It's very different, if you go into a just a normal looking room and you do some strange or exotic act in it, because the room is so bland, the act itself looks kind of bland and it's just too normal in a way, and I think fetishes are, they're a celebration of some rather intense feelings, and
Ah, okay.
they need the costume and the imagination. I mean, they are essentially imagination in some ways, and so there needs to be a celebration of the imagination. So it was only really when I got to Pandora's Box, that I kinda understood that too. That was incredible. And there were the dominatrixes, the mistresses were from, there was some people there from France, there was Japanese, they were kind of from all over. And, yeah, they all had a very particular point of view.
The people who are coming in there,
Well,
the
the
mistresses.
and the mistresses
Yeah.
themselves, and then it was kind of more of a upper end place. There were a lot of people from Wall Street coming in.
And they many let you film
Some of them did, yeah,
there.
some of them didn't want their faces filmed, some of them were wearing masks and stuff
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah,
so you couldn't really, they weren't necessarily, uh, you know they weren't working, so they weren't, like, having conversations. So,
yeah.
yeah, it was, and obviously, some of them had very interesting fetishes, of one sort or another. They catered for everything, really, and, uh, and so it was kind of yeah.
And so that seems like a very important part of your filmmaking style as well, the sort of unshockability, like, whilst making the film remaining very neutral throughout what you were seeing and documenting.
Yeah, I mean, I think I certainly Mistress Raven, who was the person who ran Pandora's Box, she got pretty tired of me after a while. I guess film crews are disruptive,
Yeah.
and occasionally we'd go in the wrong room at the wrong time and someone would freak out because they didn't want to be filmed or, and I
You would
think
just barge in with the
I think although I never really wanted to be beaten, she
yeah.
really wanted to beat me.
Yeah.
We still talk actually. We're still pretty good friends, Mrs. Raven and I. But she she at times, I think, got pretty fed up with us being
Yeah.
around. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it disrupted some of the flow there. And did you observe, like, was it a healing process for the dominatrixes and the clients?
Yeah, well, I think that they were all, very into it and
Yeah,
dedicated to it. It's kind of like a weird sorority house in a way,
yeah.
or a weird family of people who speak a particular language and have a particular knowledge, you know. So they're very tight, very close, really, and it's a very strong community. You know, I don't know about other places, but certainly in New York, the the dominatrixes and they all knew each other, and they, you know, after work, they'd all go to the same places, or they certainly it was certainly an interesting way of getting to know New York,
Yeah.
is they'd go, you know, when they'd finished work, they'd all, you know, be wired and wanna go clubbing or whatever, and they were obviously pretty well known all over New York, so it was a interesting insight into New York. I guess it was in the late '90s when it was still pretty very wild.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was great. It was, you know, it was a fun it was kind of a fun, and, you know, I felt fortunate to have made the film, really.
Yeah, and, what's interesting is that you capture quite a lot of vulnerability in these strong dominatrixes. Like, you know, there's a lot of psychology in this film, the kind of the front that they're putting on and the vulnerability that's underneath, as well as, I'm
Yeah.
wondering if the clients who come in there, though, if it's a process of healing for them or if it's just like an addiction to their playing out these
I guess it
scenarios.
it varies, doesn't it,
Yeah.
on the you know, and some of the fetishes were very extreme.
And you didn't have to go through that process as part of your research?
Well, no,
No.
I didn't actually.
You feel like, "You're gonna point a camera and a mic at me. That'll be my, torture."
For me, yeah. Um,
They didn't because sometimes people I don't know if you found this, something I found that when wanting to document a subject, they want you to go, like, immerse yourself more in the
uh,
subject.
I
You didn't
don't I didn't really feel that. I mean, I think you probably select your crew,
yeah.
to, you know, to be interesting for the like, for example, I started the shoot with, you know, a cameraman that I'd worked with before, you know, who I liked a lot, but the mistresses, for some reason, really did not like him, you know, as a group. Um, and I had this very there was somebody I'd worked who actually I got from, HBO, who'd worked with HBO before, who lives locally, actually, funnily enough, in Brighton, called Michelle DaCosta. Sort of really beautiful, black woman who, um, kind of, I guess, understood that world a lot better than I did and had some, you know, very good relationships with the mistresses. And then I actually changed my camera person and got this very sort of, interesting Frenchman who all the mistresses seemed to think was wonderful. So, you know, I guess, you know, part of what you do is try and construct the team that is gonna work well in that particular environment, you know, and try and fit in as best you can. I mean, I think it, you know, in a way, it's always kind of useful to be this strange British guy who is sort of out of his depth and doesn't really know what's going on and is asking a lot of naive questions. You know, I think you know, some people enjoyed that relationship. You know, and
Yeah, it's more polite than if you were
yeah, probably, yeah, rather than of the scene.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay, so the
yeah.
detachment, yeah,
Well, and
is
this
more
was actually the first. Well, I had made a film in a legalized brothel before,
chicken
a place called the
ranch?
Chicken Ranch. So, but this was really the only. This probably the second film I did that was very directly to do, you know, with, you know, kind of explicit sexual content, and this obviously went deeper into it
Yeah, this one's like
than
the
Chicken Ranch
psychology
did.
kind
Yeah.
although Chicken Ranch is a strong film as well,
Yeah.
you have the portraits, but then you have, like, the psychology of what they're going through and the
Yeah.
life that they're living.
And probably more so in this one. I can't yeah.
And Chicken Ranch, you're in it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was that your first film that you appeared in, or was that
No, that was a film called Driving Me Crazy.
Driving Me
Yeah,
Crazy?
which you
Yes,
mentioned.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah, where things kind of yeah, and at first, you know, people were like, the commissioning editors especially were like, they would call my producer up and say, "Try and keep him out of the film if you can,"
Until
you
they
know?
realized that
Well, and
acting.
then they actually wanted
Yeah.
me to be in the film, and in a way, as a filmmaker, it's just interesting experimenting with films and, sometimes it would be appropriate to be in a film and other times really not, because the subject's so much more interesting, frankly, than you are. So, as part I would generally put myself in the films if the process of making the film was part of it. And I guess, you're going into a rather strange and different world, the world of fetishes and so on. And I felt maybe it would add a dimension to be kind of like, the stranger going in and all that sort of thing. So I was in this one a little bit. In fact, some of the earlier cuts of the film, I wasn't in it at all.
Yeah.
And then Sheila Nevins, I remember, who was then the head of HBO Docs, and was until, for years and years, said, "I really think you should put more of yourself in because it adds a different dimension and, it actually makes the film more accessible."
Yes, because you become like the portal through which the
Yeah.
audience can
Yeah.
can explore.
So I did put myself in, and I know because some of the mistresses then, got stacks and stacks of DVDs and stuff and would sell them when the film was finished,
So
and
everyone knew
some
you.
of their clients would complain about this idiot being in the film, which was me,
Yeah.
So I don't think everyone particularly loved me being in the films, but, you know, uh
Yeah. Oh, because they probably took their fetishes so very seriously.
Yes, and who is this stupid English person? Y
Making it
yeah,
accessible, our secret
being a
underground
fool,
world.
yeah, and yeah.
Maybe lifting the lid on probably part of the appeal of that whole world is that it's kind of quiet, contained,
Yeah,
secretive, and so
yeah,
opening it up makes it, uh,
yeah.
less potent for the.
Well, it is a very particular world, and I think, it's, quite closed and quite intimate because it's closed, and, um, I think, you know, somebody poking their nose in isn't always appreciated, in
Yeah.
some quarters.
Yes, yes, but you did it so elegantly, and the film is a beautiful watch. It's very insightful, and the topic of BDSM for healing is coming up a lot in mainstream culture right now, and so it's interesting to see. This is a film you made how many years ago?
Oh,
In the 90s.
yeah,
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
90s.
So, you were really ahead of the time. The fetish scene has grown. It's so mainstream now. Torture Garden, throwing parties,
Yeah.
like around the world. And yeah, this topic of BDSM for healing keeps coming up in sort of
Mm.
mainstream articles. And so that's interesting because it seems like quite a dark world of exploration. So the idea of it being healing, I wish I could ask the mistresses of the Pandora's box that question. What do you think they'd say?
Yeah, I think they would agree with that.
That it's healing.
Yeah, I think they would agree with that, and I think they, feel that they're doing a very valuable service.
Mm. But I suppose it could be, like, just re-traumatizing if someone's got some trauma that they're playing out.
Yeah,
They just.
continuously, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Mm.
most of the mistresses I knew now I kind of really respected them, actually. I
Yeah.
mean, I went in obviously not knowing them uh, but as a group of people, they were really kinda great people and, and caring and kind of dedicated, to their work and that they weren't just doing it for money, I don't think.
They seem to
They were
really
very
like
much a
what they
part of
do.
the scene.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the power that comes with that job. They sort of enjoy that.
Yeah.
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 And the glamour, I mean, it looks really glamorous. I was, yeah, I remember after that, after seeing Fetishes, the next film of yours that I saw was Kurt and Courtney.
Right, which is completely different.
It was completely different, and I was really excited. I got to go to the premiere of that in London.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
In Islington?
Yep.
That
Was it
was
in
pretty
Islington or
wild.
was it in Leicester Square? I feel
Or
like
was
it
it?
was
I
on that
can't
one.
remember where it
Yeah,
was.
it was, and, I was working at MTV at the time,
All
so
right.
very
Yeah.
exciting for me to kind of see that zeitgeist film, completely different. And actually, your films have all moved from one totally different subject to the
Yeah,
next.
to
You like to
another.
switch up
Yeah.
the themes, the
Well, I
structure of
think I
purpose.
just, uh, I never really know what film I'm gonna do, next.
Yeah.
I'm not one of these people who has a list of films they're gonna make. So I always feel the last experience, leads you in a direction you hopefully don't know about, which is what I've enjoyed so much, is not being particularly planned and organized, and going from one to the other, but taking some of the last film, so they are all, yeah, they're all very, very different from each other.
And do you generate and pitch most of your films, or do some come to you? Do some find you?
Well, the fetishes film did.
Yeah,
I
come to
think
you.
pretty, yeah,
Yeah.
that was probably, I think Driving Me Crazy too was something, it was a film I was offered, um, that went really, really wrong. So, and when something goes really wrong, you, you either can do a bold thing to try and make it right. In other words, take an enormous step backwards and look at it and think, how can I reconfigure this? Which you can do in documentary. I think you really can't do that in feature films because it's such an enormous machine and there's so many people. It's like an ocean liner. Turning it round or stopping it is
Yeah.
impossible. Whereas in documentary, what I love about them is they're very flexible. You can turn them around quickly. You can do different kinds of shots that are very, jiggly and intimate, and, it's a very spontaneously creative, form, you know, and I think, well, features is just different,
A lot more planning, a lot more
well, a lot more
getting
planning
everything
anyway, and you have
neat.
to obviously be really very good at working with actors and so on, which I don't think I am.
Well, I mean, we can talk about that too. You have gone into fiction,
Yeah, no, I have,
direct
but I've
cinema.
always used sort of real people rather than actors.
Yeah, well, can you talk a little bit about that? Because you moved into direct cinema. What inspired you to do that?
Well,
Is my
actually, I was somebody at Channel 4, Peter Dale, who took over and started Film 4, or started, yeah, the 4th channel, Channel 4, said, he was interested in exploring making feature films in a different way and using kind of some of the documentary techniques, like with real people and so on, to tell very real stories. And, so I did 2 films for him. One was, about the cockle picker disaster in Morecambe Bay, and we sort of, uh, cast real Chinese, well, undocumented workers. Many of them were completely illegal here. So Channel 4 was pretty brave to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine doing that in Trump's America. And then I did one about the Marines who did this terrible massacre in a place called Haditha.
Battle for
Yeah, Battle for Haditha. And we used, real Marines and real Iraqis in that film, and which we shot in Jordan. So those were amazing experiences, but I wasn't very good at using, actors.
yeah.
It was kind of, I loved working with the Marines and with the, you know, Iraqi people who had so much emotion and they had all experienced what the film was about.
Yeah.
So in that way, it was very like making a documentary.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what was the challenge with directing actors? Maybe you're so used to the spontaneity of real life that when you get people who can switch
Well,
it off,
funnily
switch
enough,
it
we
on.
we had a couple of real actors, one of whom was this guy called Michael Pitt, who's quite well known.
Oh yeah, he played Kurt Cobain, didn't he?
He did.
In a movie
Yeah,
about
and
yeah.
he's done a lot of movies. Anyway, he came out there and, and the first thing was telling him that he was living in the barracks with all the other soldiers. He wasn't getting some swanky hotel suite.
Method
And
acting.
yeah, and he couldn't bring his girlfriend, and and, he had to stop taking whatever substances he was taking, unless the Marines were kind of supplying them,
Yeah.
So, and he found that impossibly difficult, and we had to send him back, after a couple of weeks. So,
So you're done.
well, because the other Marines were like, they were all this group of people
Yeah.
in the
He was.
barracks, and they just got back into who they were. And I guess, someone like Michael, they didn't know what it was like.
Yeah. Well,
But
that sounds like the ultimate method acting, putting
yeah, I
a
guess
trained actor
it
into a
was
situation.
ultimate method acting.
And
And Ghost was the same thing, kind of like I remember for the research on that, I was with, uh, this Chinese woman called, what's her name? I Ching, and she obviously spoke fluent Chinese and a little bit of English. And I was supposed to be this, South African kind of who didn't really speak, who was kind of a bit of a simpleton. And we were all living in this sort of weird house up in Birmingham. And we were picking spring onions and, you know, and it was pretty, but just to get a sense of what there were like 10 of us sleeping in this bedroom. And
oh my
yeah.
gosh. What was this to get the real feeling of
Yeah, and
yes.
I also had a hidden camera, which was in this kind of woolly hat I had. The hidden cameras were pretty, primitive in those days,
Yeah.
and I remember it was unbelievably hot, and I was wearing this woolly hat out in the fields,
No one
just
wondered?
sweating like mad, and also you had to, you know, y if you got a camera and you're trying to film things, you have to move your head quite slowly, you can't move it, you know, you can't do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so the Chinese gangmaster thought I was really stupid, and I was also packing the spring onions really slowly compared to everybody else, so he kept wanting to fire me. A
So that was undercover, basically.
that was all undercover, and then I remember I was engaged, at that time. At the end of it, I noticed that my ring had gone, my engagement ring had gone, and I was, like, a bit mortified, and I said to my producer, I've lost my engagement ring. I think it's in the field with the spring onions." And he said, "Oh, no, we've gotta get it back. It'd be such bad karma if you lose your engagement ring."
Yeah.
And so we completely blew our cover because suddenly, all these
Metal
people
detector.
arrived with metal detectors, and we found it.
You
But,
found
yeah,
it.
but that was the end of that particular experience.
You couldn't go back with the wood.
Oh, yeah, the guy was like, "Ah!"
Oh my gosh, that's really funny. So I want to just touch on My Father and Me, which I saw at the London screening at the B&A
Right,
with my father.
right.
It's a really important film of yours.
Yeah,
I feel like it's the most personal film of
yeah.
yours, even though they're all very personal, all your films, because of the ones with you in them particularly. But can you just say something about that and the photography, your father's photography,
Yeah,
linked
well,
to the exhibition?
yeah,
Or
The V&A Museum said they were
yeah.
gonna do this exhibition of my father's work, which was up for, I think, over a year, and, um, and they said, "Why don't you kind of do a film about, his work and you and his influence and so on?" Um, and I was kind of really reluctant to do it because, it's you kind of think, "Oh my god," you have such a having a relationship with a parent is so complicated. It's like, how do you tell the story? And we didn't always get on terribly well, like probably all fathers and sons. We went through really difficult periods, and I thought I don't know how that would be to make that sort of public. And my father had also died, so um, but then I thought I'd be such a coward not to do it. It's such a great opportunity. So, yeah, I started doing it, and I was very difficult, I kept finishing it and then screening it and then thinking that it's not really kind of right,
Yeah.
it's the tone's not right or so I it was actually a film with not a very good budget because it's not exactly the most commercial idea, um, but I kept remixing the film and I could somehow couldn't finish it, um so it ended up costing a fortune and, but I was very proud of it because it I think it meant an awful lot to certainly to my 2 sons, who have my youngest son never really knew my father, so it's kind of great. And then, it's great to it is amazing to have a family record,
Yeah.
uh, of that relationship. And yeah, I learned a lot doing it about, 'cause it is tempting when you're doing these films to hide a bit. You're telling everyone else's story.
Yeah.
You don't really have to tell your story, which sometimes feels great,
Yeah.
because you don't want to. So, I think it was quite therapeutic doing that, and I think like a lot of these films, it opens up a doorway to a whole other range of storytelling and emotions that you weren't really aware of before.
Yeah, it's a beautiful film, and I would love more people to see that film. Actually, one of my questions was, out of all of your films, which one, if you had to pick one, do you really want people to see? Like anyone watching or listening?
Gosh, I don't know. I mean, it's a question you get asked quite a lot. I mean, it's always easier to talk about the films that were disasters that really don't work, that you were completely dissatisfied with,
Yeah.
than what your favorite film is really, Um, I think some of the more recent films that I did are probably I don't know, 'cause, even Who Cares?, which was the first one, or Drive Me Crazy, or, um, the film about my father that you mentioned, or the film about Marianne and Leonard, um, and things like Battle for Editha. They all touch me pretty deeply. It's a bit like having lots and
Choosing
lots of children.
Yeah, choosing your favorite.
How do you choose
You
your
can't.
favorite,
You can't. But it's not the question wasn't so much which is your favorite, it's more like, which of those films do you really want people to see in terms of the message, the story, the craftsmanship, or is that still falling into favorite child category?
I don't know. I mean, certainly, I think the film about my father is because we all have fathers and we all have complex
Yeah.
relationships. So I think a lot of people can relate to that.
Yes. I
And
would
then
say
I
so.
think a film like, Marianne Leonard is a kind of love story. And everybody has love stories, whether they
Yeah.
worked or they didn't
Yeah.
work. So I think, I think, part of the secret is to try and tell a universal story that relates to across language and all the rest of it to a multiplicity of people.
Yeah. So telling a universal story through a kind of microscopic
Yeah, exactly.
picture. I feel like that's really important what you just said. That's like a big takeaway is telling a bigger story through something smaller.
I think you said that actually, but
Yeah, well, I just rephrase you. Yeah, zooming in, like when you describe Pandora's Box as telling a bigger picture, or the love story of Marianne and Leonard. Also, so would you do another direct cinema style film? Would you?
well, I think
Would
if
that?
the opportunity came along, probably, and it was the right subject,
Yeah, you
yeah,
would
I
be happy to
definitely
explore
would.
that
Yeah,
again.
I mean, we worked on various ideas, um, and a lot of what you do depends too on your relationships with people in places like Channel 4, HBO, whatever.
Yeah,
And when they move on, it
yeah,
it becomes difficult to make that particular kind of film.
yeah. Right.
Yeah.
You're being championed in a specific way.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So, is here's a wild card. Anything you want to talk about that you have not yet already before we conclude this
Right.
interview?
Do I have anything?
Yes.
Um,
Anything you want to share? Like, okay, for me as an aspiring documentary
right.
filmmaker, what advice would you give me? Onwards and upwards after this interview.
Well,
Um,
I think that, the hardest thing for everybody is to have belief in your own convictions sometimes, and not to come up with a whole lot of negative reasons for you not doing something. And I think it's easy to spend a lot of time waiting for the funding to come through, or waiting for something, or, and just sort of putting off that moment of picking up a camera and starting. And I think, in a way, it's easier now with phones and all the rest of it, to make a story in a very inexpensive way and just find out whether that is indeed the way you want to tell a story, and you can tell a very accomplished story with a phone or, you know, with your best mate helping you. And then I think you can use that as a sort of visiting card. It doesn't have to be long, it could be 20 minutes long. If it's original and intimate and has a has something special, I think it will still be it will still get you started.
Have you made a documentary with phones?
Well, I haven't, no. I guess my borrowing a wind-up camera and
The Bolex
borrowing
version. We
yeah.
had Bolexes at film school too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I guess,
with your version.
it was
It'd
yeah.
be quite cool if you shot a documentary on phones.
Yeah, and well, actually on the film I did about the Stones, um, I shot the whole Bill Wyman thing on a phone because he was so apprehensive about having a big camera and lighting
So you,
that I just sort of pulled my phone out and said, "Let's just do it now." He
yeah,
said, "What, right now?" I said, "Yeah."
yeah,
And we just talked for the next 2 hours, on the phone.
yeah. Very
So yeah,
unintimidating.
so I think sometimes it is an intimate thing that people are all used to now.
Yeah. So maybe your next film might be brought to us by Galaxy, Samsung, Nokia. Who knows? Who knows? I think that could be quite exciting because yeah, and I could shoot some of it for you on the phone. Yeah. So basically, what I'm hearing is the golden nuggets of advice are don't let the second guessing
Yeah, and just have
hold you
belief in you
back.
have belief in yourself and don't, don't I think the hardest thing is to maintain belief in yourself and not put your idea down or put yourself down or don't listen to that sort of negative voice in your head that we all have, it's
And then if you get a strong idea, how would you advise me to hone that in and make it really strong? I have two films that I want to make, but how to hone that in and make it really strong?
well,
You just start shooting and then the story tells you what it's going to be.
yeah, I think especially in the beginning, you learn more from trial and error than you do having it all worked out. You
Yeah.
kind of learn what works and and you certainly learn what doesn't work. So it's just it's an adventure and you need you have to take the good with the bad, I think.
You're right. Documentary filmmaking is an adventure.
Yeah, well, it all is really.
And you are the pioneer and the captain of the documentary adventure. It's such an honor to
Well,
actually
it's
do
been
that.
and I'm pleased we finally found the place.
Me too. Me too. So thank you very much for
Pleasure.
being my guest on the Light Conversations, and I'm looking forward to sharing this out and you know having more people. So you've got like box sets. There are many ways that people can actually see all of your films.
Yeah, I think on a lot are on Amazon Prime
Yeah, Fetishes
or
out soon on Mango TV,
yeah.
which I'm very pleased about too.
Mm.
So yeah, thank you, Nick, for
Thank
being
you.
on as a guest.